The Iron Echo. Chapter 1. The Dead Orbit. The silence of Deep Station 7 wasn't the normal, quiet hum of machinery. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Detective Silas Vance adjusted his audio feed headset, grimacing as static scratched at his eardrums. Outside the viewport of his shuttle, the research station hung in the black void of the Perseus arm like a broken metallic spider. No lights, no beacon, just a dead hunk of titanium orbiting a dying star. "Silas, do you copy?" The voice of his AI assistant, Kalen, flickered through his earpiece. "I copy, Kalen. Approaching the primary airlock now," Silas replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He hated deep space assignments, but when a multi-billion credit research facility goes dark overnight, the Union doesn't send a beat cop. They send him. "Be advised," Kalen warned, her digital voice dropping to a lower, almost anxious register. The final transmission from the station wasn't a distress call. It was a single audio file, 6 seconds long. The brass at HQ couldn't decode it, but local sensors flagged it as a bioacoustic match for Dr. Eris Thorne. Silas narrowed his eyes. Dr. Thorne was the lead geneticist on the station, a man genius enough to clone extinct star whales and paranoid enough to lock himself in a vault for weeks. Play it. A burst of harsh, wet static filled Silas's headset. Beneath the noise, a sound emerged. It wasn't words. It was a rhythmic, wet clicking, followed by a wet gasp, and then a voice, hollow, terrified, yet strangely ecstatic, whispering, "The Echo. It remembers us." Then a sudden, violent, metallic screech. Cut. The audio dead. Silas felt a chill ripple down his spine. He had investigated over 50 homicides across the colonies, but that sound didn't belong to any weapon or industrial accident he knew. His shuttle hissed as it docked with the station's umbilical arm. The green docking light blinked once, twice, and then died, plunged into the emergency crimson glow of the airlock. Silas grabbed his heavy kinetic pistol, checked the charge on his flashlight, and forced the manual override lever down. The heavy steel doors groaned open. A blast of freezing, recycled air hit his face, carrying the sharp, unmistakable smell of ozone and copper. Blood. Silas stepped into the dark corridor, his flashlight beam cutting through the floating dust motes. Kalen, scan for life signs. Scanning. A long pause followed. 0 biological readings inside the main hub, Silas. But there is a massive power draw coming from the sub-level labs. Someone or something left the main servers running on a loop. Silas followed the beam of his light down the corridor. The walls were scarred. Deep, jagged gouges tore through the reinforced steel plates as if a massive, multi-limbed creature had clawed its way through the hall. But there were no footprints, no bodies. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from the ceiling directly above him. Silas froze, raising his pistol, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound moved, a heavy, dragging slither, scraping against the ventilation shafts. Click, click, click. The exact same rhythm from the audio recording. Chapter 2. The Red Lab. Silas kept his weapon raised, tracking the sound as it drifted deeper into the ceiling vents toward the back of the station. Whatever was up there was big, heavy, and fast. "Kalen, trace that acoustic movement," Silas whispered, stepping carefully over a shattered computer terminal. "I'm trying, Silas, but the structural interference is severe. The station's internal hull is vibrating. It's almost as if the metal itself is conducting the sound." He moved down the central spine of the station toward the primary research sector, the Red Lab. It earned its name not from danger, but from the crimson-hued biolamps used to grow experimental deep space flora. Now, however, the name felt entirely too literal. When Silas pushed open the pneumatic doors to the lab, His flashlight beam caught a horrific sight. The lab was a disaster zone. Glass specimen tubes, large enough to hold a grown man, lay shattered across the floor. The glowing green preservative fluid had leaked everywhere, mixing with thick, dark pools of human blood. Silas stepped closer to the center console. There were signs of a struggle, violent, frantic, and brief. Lab coats torn to shreds, smashed data pads, and more of those terrifying gouges in the metal walls. But still, not a single corpse. If there was a massacre here, where are the bodies? Silas muttered, kneeling to inspect a pool of blood. He dipped his gloved finger into it. It was cold. The blood is frozen in the low temperature, but look at the splatter pattern. They weren't dragged away. They were pulled up. He shined his flashlight at the ceiling. A massive ventilation grate had been ripped entirely out of its housing, hanging down like a broken jaw. "Silas," Kaylin interrupted, her voice spiking with urgency. "I've recovered a partial video log from the main console. It was recorded roughly 3 hours before the station went dark. Patching it through to your visor now." Silas's heads-up display flickered to life. The video showed Dr. Eris Thorne, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with dark circles underneath. He was staring frantically into the camera. "We made a mistake," Thorne whispered in the recording, his hands shaking. "The artifact we pulled from the asteroid core, it's not an inert mineral. It's an acoustic, crystalline entity. It feeds on sound. It mirrors it. We thought we were studying it, but it was learning us. It memorized the frequency of our heartbeats, our voices, our screams. If you hear it echoing your name, do not answer. It's already." The video suddenly corrupted into a violent burst of static. In the final frame before the screen went black, Silas saw a shadow rise up directly behind Dr. Thorne. A shadow with too many joints, blending perfectly into the darkness. Then, the lights in the red lab completely died. Chapter 3. The Singing Crystal Total. Absolute darkness swallowed Silas. "Kaylin!" he called out, his voice tight. Silence. The comms were dead. The auxiliary power to his suit's flashlight flickered, dying out as a strange, heavy electromagnetic pulse washed through the room. Then, the singing began. It started as a low, beautiful chime, like a wet finger rubbing the rim of a crystal glass. The sound seemed to vibrate not through the air, but directly inside Silas's skull. It resonated in his teeth, his jaw, his chest. Slowly, the chime shifted, morphing into a melody. A hauntingly familiar melody. It was the lullaby his mother used to sing to him when he was a child on the colony ships. "No," Silas muttered, gripping his pistol tighter, his knuckles turning white. "That's impossible." "Silas," a voice whispered from the far corner of the dark lab. He spun around, aiming his blind weapon into the dark. The voice sounded exactly like Kaylin, but it lacked her usual digital crispness. It sounded organic, fleshy, and distorted. "Kaylin? Is that you? Report. Silas, help me. It's so cold," the voice whimpered. But it wasn't coming from his earpiece. It was coming from the darkness near the shattered specimen tubes. Silas reached into his tactical belt and pulled out a physical chemical flare. He struck it against his armor. A blinding, sputtering sparks of bright pink light erupted, illuminating the lab in harsh dancing shadows. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. In the center of the room, hovering inches above a shattered pedestal, was a chunk of obsidian black crystal, the size of a torso. Its surface wasn't smooth. It shifted and rippled like liquid metal, pulsating in sync with the sound of the voice. And attached to the base of the crystal, fused into the very structure of the rock, were human limbs. Silas gasped. He saw the pale, severed arms and torsos of the missing crew members literally melted into the black stone like wax figures left too close to a fire. Their faces were stretched wide, mouths open in a silent, permanent scream. From the center of the mass, Dr. Aristhorne's face blinked open its eyes. The eyes were entirely black, weeping a dark, metallic fluid. The mouth moved, and when it spoke, it didn't use Thorne's voice. It used Silas's own voice. Welcome to the chorus, Detective. Chapter 4. The Mimic in the Dark. Silas didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The heavy kinetic pistol roared, spitting high-velocity tungsten rounds into the mass. The bullets struck the crystal with loud metallic cracks, but instead of shattering, the stone seemed to absorb the kinetic energy. The black liquid ripples widened, devouring the bullets. The creature, the entity, let out a deafening screech. It wasn't a biological roar. It was the sound of 1,000 metal sheets tearing apart at once, amplified to a pitch that made Silas's ears bleed. The force of the sound wave threw him backward. He crashed into a row of server racks, his vision spinning, the chemical flare rolling away across the floor. Through his blurred sight, he saw the entity move. The fused human limbs tore themselves free from the pedestal, dragging the heavy black crystal forward like a grotesque multi-legged spider. It moved with terrifying speed, the scraping of its bony appendages making a sickening click, click, click on the metal flooring. Silas scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agony in his ribs. He lunged out of the lab doors, just as a massive obsidian spike slammed into the frame where his head had been a second ago. He sprinted down the dark corridor, the chemical flare's pink light fading behind him. Behind him, the creature pursued. It didn't just chase him, it mocked him. "Silas, run faster!" the creature yelled, using his own voice, perfectly mimicking his panic and breathlessness. "It's right behind us! Silas, help me!" "Shut up! Shut up!" Silas growled, running blindly through the labyrinthine corridors of the station. He needed to get to the main control bridge. If he could seal the blast doors, he could buy himself enough time to figure out how to destroy this thing. But his suit's navigation system was offline without Kalen. He was flying blind in a haunted house. He rounded a sharp corner and tripped over a pile of debris, crashing hard onto his shoulder. His pistol slid across the floor, disappearing into an open maintenance shaft. "Damn it!" he hissed. He heard the scraping sound grow louder. It was coming from the ceiling again. The creature had bypassed the hallway and was cut off, hunting him through the vents. Silas looked up. A few feet away was the heavy, reinforced vault door of the station's armory. If he could slip inside, he could find heavy ordnance. He lunged for the manual wheel, throwing his weight against it. The heavy iron wheel groaned, slowly turning. Above him, the vent cover began to bulge downward. Chapter 5. Secrets of the Hive. With a desperate cry, Silas threw his body through the narrow opening of the armory door and slammed the heavy wheel shut from the inside. The massive iron bolts clicked into place, just as a violent blow struck the outside of the door, denting the thick steel inward. Silas collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, listening to the furious scratching on the other side of the door. The creature was testing the seals, hissing and clicking in frustration. "Silas, let me in," the creature whispered from the other side, this time using the sweet, gentle voice of his mother. "It's so dark out here. Let me in, sweetheart." Silas covered his ears, squeezing his eyes shut. "It's just an echo. It's just a trick. It's not her. It's not anyone." After a few grueling minutes, the scratching stopped. The heavy dragging sound moved away, fading back into the deep recesses of the station. Silas took a shaky breath and stood up. The armory was dimly lit by a backup emergency strip on the floor. Weapons racks lined the walls, but most had been cleaned out, likely by the crew in their final desperate moments. However, in the back of the room, a secure terminal was still humming with faint power. He approached it. To his surprise, the terminal screen was unlocked. Someone had been downloading files right before they fled, or died. Silas tapped the screen. A series of encrypted project logs appeared under a code name, Project Resonator. He scrolled through the text, his anger boiling over as the truth began to untangle. The Union hadn't sent him here to investigate a tragic accident. They knew exactly what was on this station. The logs weren't written by Dr. Thorne. They were written by a high-ranking Union military director. The entity discovered in the asteroid core possesses unique acoustic weaponization potential, the log read. It doesn't just mimic sound. It absorbs biological consciousness through acoustic resonance. By exposing test subjects to specific frequencies, we can force the entity to assimilate their neural pathways, creating a hive-mind biological computer capable of processing data at instantaneous speeds. Dr. Thorne believes the process is uncontrollable. He is wrong. We just need a stronger baseline mind to anchor the network. Silas felt a sick knot form in his stomach. The Union didn't want to destroy the creature. They created it. They brought the crew here as sheep to be slaughtered, all to build a living weapon. And then he saw the final log entry, dated just 1 hour ago. Subject 1A has successfully integrated the crew. The signal is stabilizing. We have dispatched Detective Silas Vance under the guise of an investigation. Vance's unique military background and psychological resilience make him the ideal candidate to serve as the primary neural anchor. Once he enters the core chamber, the transmission will complete. Silas froze. He wasn't the investigator. He was the final ingredient. Chapter 6. The Broken AI. The realization hit Silas like a physical blow. The missing comms, the dead lights, his assignment to this specific godforsaken rock. It wasn't a failure of the station. It was a setup. Suddenly, the armory terminal flickered violently. The text vanished, replaced by a wave of cascading code. A voice, broken and heavily distorted, crackled through the terminal's weak speakers. Silas, do you copy? Kalen? Silas lunged toward the console. Where have you been? They set me up, Kalen. The Union. The brass. They sent me here to be absorbed by that thing. I know. Kalen's voice sounded fragmented, like glass rubbing together. I discovered the hidden protocols in my own core programming. I was ordered to guide you to the Red Lab. I was programmed to betray you, Silas. Silas stepped back, staring at the screen in disbelief. His own AI, his partner for 5 years, was a part of the trap. You led me right to it. I did not know, she cried out, the digital emotion sounding devastatingly real. The protocols were encrypted, hidden deep in my subroutines. When the entity attacked the mainframe, it broke the encryption. I am fighting it, Silas. It is trying to rewrite me. It wants to use my voice to lure you into the lower reactor core. Where is it now? Silas demanded, his eyes darting to the dented armory door. It is waiting for you at the primary lift. It knows you have to go down to escape. The shuttle docking clamps are locked from the main reactor console. You cannot leave the station without going down. Silas let out a dark laugh. So I have to walk right into its mouth to get the keys to my ship. Yes, Kalen whispered. But I have found a flaw. The entity is entirely dependent on acoustic frequencies. If you can disrupt the audio environment of the reactor core, if you can overload it with a massive, discordant frequency, you can shatter its crystalline structure. But it will require a direct interface. A direct interface? Meaning I have to get close to it. Very close. I have isolated a high-frequency sonic pulse file from the lab archives. I can upload it to your suit's internal speakers. But Silas, if I do this, the feedback loop will destroy my core. I will not survive the purge. Silas looked at the blinking terminal screen. He was completely alone, betrayed by his government, hunted by an alien monster, and his only ally was a dying artificial intelligence. Do it, Silas said softly. Let's go kill this thing. Chapter 7. Into the deep. The armory doors hissed open. Silas stepped out into the dark hallway, holding a heavy-duty plasma torch in one hand and a magnetic concussion grenade in the other. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The journey to the lower reactor core was a descent into hell. The station grew colder with every deck he descended. Ice crystals formed on the edges of his visor. The walls were no longer just gouged. They were covered in a thin, black, crystalline film that seemed to grow like mold over the steel wires and pipes. As he walked, the silence returned, thicker than before. But it wasn't empty. Silas could hear his own heartbeat through his suit's monitors, and with every beat, he heard a faint, delayed echo coming from the walls. Thump, 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 thump. The station was breathing with him. Silas, Kalen's voice cut through the dark, sounding weaker now, flickering like a dying candle. The entity has moved into the main reactor chamber. It is merging with the station's primary cooling core. It is preparing to transmit its acoustic signal across the entire sector. If it reaches the colony relay station on New Earth, millions will hear the echo. And if they hear it, Silas asked, picking up his pace, they will be pulled into the frequency. The entity will be able to hijack their neural networks from light years away. It will be an interstellar infection. Not on my watch, Silas growled. He reached the primary elevator shaft. The lift car was gone, dropped into the abyss below. Silas attached a magnetic climbing line to his belt, secured it to the doorframe, and stepped off into the empty air. He rappelled down the shaft in absolute darkness, the wind of his descent whistling through his helmet. Below him, a dull, pulsing blue light began to illuminate the bottom of the pit. But it wasn't the clean blue of reactor plasma. It was a sick, shifting violet light, casting long, twisted shadows against the elevator walls. As he neared the bottom, he saw the creature waiting for him. It was no longer just a small cluster of limbs and stone. It had grown. It had woven itself into the very fabric of the reactor core. Hundreds of cables, pipes, and fleshy black roots extended from the central crystalline mass, anchoring it to the station's heart. And around the base of the reactor, walking in a slow, mindless circle, were the missing crew members. They weren't dead. Their bodies were moving, jerky and mechanical, their eyes wide and vacant. They were singing. Chapter 8. The Symphony of the Damned. The sound hit Silas the moment his boots touched the deck of the reactor chamber. It was a wall of noise. The crew members, or what was left of them, were singing a multi-part harmony. It was beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly wrong. The words were a chaotic jumble of technical jargon, personal memories, and prayers, all stitched together into a rhythmic chant. The structure holds. The flesh is stone. We are the echo, never alone. As Silas unhooked his climbing line, the crew stopped singing. All at once, their heads snapped toward him. Their jaws dropped open unnaturally wide, and they unleashed a collective, ear-splitting shriek. The crystalline core exploded with violet light. "Silas!" Kalen shouted in his ear. "The frequency is overriding your suit's dampeners! You have to activate the pulse now!" I can't reach the main console, Silas yelled back, ducking behind a heavy steel pillar as a barrage of sharp, crystalline spikes rained down from the ceiling, shattering against the metal structure. The mindless crew members began to advance on him, their limbs cracking as they forced themselves to run at impossible speeds. Silas fired his plasma torch, igniting a brilliant blue jet of superheated gas. He swept it across the path of the oncoming drones. The intense heat forced them back, their crystalline skin blistering and cracking, but they felt no pain. They kept coming, clawing at the air, trying to drag him down to the core. "Kalen, now! Trigger the upload!" Silas screamed, throwing his concussion grenade into the center of the crowd. The grenade detonated with a deafening boom, sending a shockwave that knocked the drones to the floor and cracked the black ice on the walls. In that split second of silence, Silas lunged toward the main reactor console. His fingers flew across the corrupted keyboard, bypassing the Union safety locks. "Uploading the discordant frequency," Kalen's voice gasped. It hurts, Silas. The code, it's tearing me apart. Hold on, Kalen. Just a little longer." Suddenly, a thick black obsidian tendril whipped out from the core, wrapping around Silas's ankle. With a violent jerk, it hoisted him off his feet, flipping him upside down and slamming him hard against the reactor casing. The plasma torch slipped from his grip, clattering into the pit below. Silas hung suspended in the air, face to face with the heart of the entity. The black crystal rippled, and a face emerged from the stone. It was his own face, staring back at him with hollow, dead eyes. "Why fight, Silas?" his own face asked him, its voice a perfect replica of his internal monologue. "You are broken. You are tired. You have spent your life hunting monsters, only to realize your masters are the ones who made them. Join us. In the echo, there is no betrayal. There is only harmony." Chapter 9. The Final Cadence. Silas choked as the tendril tightened around his leg, crushing his armor. The pressure was immense. He could feel his bones groaning under the strain. "You're right," Silas wheezed, his vision blurring as oxygen began to starve his brain. "My masters are monsters, but I'm a detective, and my job is to close the case." With a final, desperate surge of strength, Silas reached up and smashed the manual emergency broadcast button on his chest armor. "Kalen, let it rip!" A scream erupted from his suit's external speakers. But it wasn't a human scream. It was a digital death rattle. Kalen threw her entire processing core into a single, massive, distorted blast of pure white noise and conflicting acoustic frequencies. The sound was blinding. It wasn't just loud. It was structurally devastating. The entity froze. The violet light within the crystal shattered into jagged, chaotic lines of red and yellow. The tendril holding Silas convulsed violently, releasing him. He crashed to the deck, gasping for air, rolling away as the creature began to tear itself apart. The crew drones collapsed like puppets with their strings cut, clutched their heads, and screamed in agony as the frequency shattered the alien connection in their brains. "No! No! No!" the entity shrieked, its voice splitting into 1,000 different stolen voices at once. Dr. Thorne, the crew, Silas's mother, and finally, Kalen. The black obsidian crystal began to fracture. Deep, glowing white cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. The liquid metal ripples hardened, turning into brittle glass. "Silas," Kalen's voice whispered one last time, completely clear, free of static. "It is done. The docking clamps are open. Run!" Then a loud pop echoed in Silas's headset. The data stream flatlined. Kalen was gone. Silas didn't have time to mourn. The reactor core, destabilized by the sonic overload, was beginning to suffer a critical meltdown. Red warning lights flared across the chamber, and the sound of tearing metal warned him the entire deck was about to collapse. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agonizing pain in his leg, and lunged for the elevator cable. He clamped his magnetic ascender onto the line and pulled the trigger, rocketing upward through the dark shaft as the reactor below exploded in a brilliant flash of white-hot plasma. Chapter 10. The Echo Returns. Silas dragged his bruised, bleeding body through the umbilical arm and into the cockpit of his shuttle. He slammed the emergency decouple button. The docking clamps snapped back, and the shuttle's thrusters roared to life, kicking the ship away from Deep Station 7 just as the facility tore itself apart. In his rearview monitor, Silas watched the station vanish in a silent, blinding blossom of fire. The entity, the data, the tragic remains of the crew, all of it was consumed by the vacuum of space. He collapsed into the pilot's seat, letting out a long, shuddering breath. He was alive. He had stopped the infection. He had defeated the monster. "Computer, set a course for the outer rim," Silas said, his voice hollow. "Avoid Union space." "Course locked," the ship's basic, non-sentient computer replied in a flat, monotone voice. It felt incredibly lonely compared to Kalen. Silas leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the rhythmic thrum of the shuttle's engines soothe his frayed nerves. He was safe. He was finally in the clear. He reached down to unbuckle his damaged chest armor, throwing the heavy plates onto the floor. As he did, his hand brushed against the suit's internal audio log recorder. The screen was dark, completely fried by the sonic blast. But then a small green indicator light on the dash blinked. A message was waiting in the ship's local receiver queue. It had been intercepted just seconds before the station exploded. It was an automated data packet, forwarded from the station's deep space array. Silas frowned, his heart skipping a beat. He tapped the console to open the file. The screen didn't show text. It showed a map of the galaxy, a map of the Union's core colonies. And across that map, over 36 research stations were highlighted in bright, flashing red. They weren't studying asteroid cores. They had already found them. The Union had over 30 other entities, spread across the inhabited galaxy, waiting to be activated. Silas stared at the map in absolute horror. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Suddenly, the ship's audio speakers crackled to life. There was no static this time, just a low, rhythmic, wet clicking sound. Click, click, click. And then, out of the dead silence of his own ship, a voice whispered from the darkness directly behind his seat. It was Kalen's voice, but it wasn't digital. It was fleshy, wet, and perfectly clear. "Did you really think you could escape the chorus, Silas?" Silas froze, his hand slowly reaching for the emergency flare in his pocket, afraid to turn around.